So, I want you to imagine a British ship of the line, right, back in the 1830s.
Okay, setting the scene, a massive instrument of imperial power.
Exactly. It is heavily armored. It is totally dominating the seas.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go down into the engine room, you are not going to find a coal furnace.
Right.
And you definitely will not find sails doing the heavy lifting either. The engine of this ship is, well, it is just a small silver bar.
Just a piece of metal.
Yeah. But it is glowing with this kinetic, almost radioactive energy. And the crazy part is that energy isn't generated by combustion.
Right. It is generated by the friction of a mistranslated Greek word.
It is just such a wild concept. So today we are looking at how author R.F. Kuang weaponizes language.
Yeah.
How she takes the fundamental building blocks of human communication and, just turns them into literal tools of reality-bending power.
It is a terrifying premise, really, because it takes something we view as completely mundane. I mean, the dictionary, the active translation, the casual words we just throw around every single day.
Yeah, the stuff we don't even think about.
Exactly. And it exposes the inherent violence and, the power hoarding underneath all of it.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at a massive cross-section today.
A lot of ground to cover.
So much. We are talking about the historical linguistic fantasy of Babel, the really dark, hyper-academic underworld of Katabasis, the brutal battlefields of the Poppy War Trilogy, and of course the contemporary psychological horror of Yellowface.
And, on the surface, these are just wildly different genres.
Oh, completely.
I mean, you have 19th century magical realism, modern hellscape academia, grimdark military fantasy, and then just a contemporary thriller set in a Manhattan apartment.
Right, but the thematic DNA is identical across all four of them.
It really is. Kuang is continuously dissecting the exact same core concepts.
The immense power of language and narrative.
Yes, and the deeply corrupting force of the institution control. Plus, the devastating personal cost of ambition when individuals try to either climb those institutions or just burn them.
So as you listen today, I really want you to consider the words you use every single day.
The institutional structures you navigate.
Right, your university, your corporate hierarchy, the media you consume. How much of your perceived reality is being manipulated or actively constructed by narratives that you had absolutely zero hand in writing?
When you really start interrogating the origin of your own thoughts, it becomes a deeply unsettling exercise.
It really does. So let us start at the absolute microscopic level of this universe, which is words.
The building blocks.
Exactly. Because if we don't understand the physics of Kuang's magic systems, the rest of the political and institutional critiques just won't land.
Right.
I want to jump straight into Babel. We are at Oxford University, at the Royal Institute of Translation, right at the height of the British Empire.
And they practice silverworking.
Yes, silverworking. But what I find so brilliant here is that the magic doesn't work because the translation is perfect.
Oh, not at all.
It works because the translation fundamentally failed.
Right. It is basically the thermodynamics of linguistics. Kuang takes the inherent frustration of being bilingual, that profound realization that you can never perfectly translate a concept from one to another, and she just turns it into a superpower.
Yeah.
Anyone who speaks two languages knows that something is always left behind. The novel posits that the lost meaning, the untranslatable gap between a word in the source language and the target language, it isn't just empty space.
It is unspent kinetic energy.
Exact.
But mechanically, how does a gap, an absence of meaning, actually generate physical force? I mean, is the silver drawing energy from the cognitive dissonance in the translator's brain?
That is a good question.
Because if it is just words on metal, that violates the basic conservation of, there has to be a mechanism, right?
Well, it is the friction between human intent and structural reality.
Right.
The silver acts as a highly sensitive, conductive matrix.
Okay.
So when a bilingual scholar engraves a word in, say, Arabic on one side of a silver bar and its closest English equivalent on the other, the silver tries to reconcile those two meanings.
But it can't.
Right, because the English word cannot encompass the full cultural, historical, and emotional weight of the Arabic word. So a conceptual delta.
A gap.
Yes, the silver catches what falls through the cracks of translation and manifests that delta as a physical, magical.
Okay, let us ground this with the specific example from the text because it is just so elegant.
The boat example.
Yes, there is a silver bar that has the ancient Greek word karabos on one side and the English word caravel on the other.
Right.
Now, we know a caravel is a ship, but karabos doesn't just mean a light ship.
No, historically, it evokes the shape of a crab or a horned beetle.
Exactly. It plays on the morphology.
Mm-hmm.
A ship with a rounded hull resembling the shell of a crustacean.
So the English word perfectly captures the ship aspect.
Right.
But it completely drops the crab aspect.
And the silver matrix captures that orphaned concept, the specific shape and movement of a crab. And when you attach that bar to a British fishing ship, the ship actually takes on those characteristics.
It becomes magically more robust.
Yeah, perhaps scuttling over rough waves with unnatural stability. The Empire is literally running on the ghosts of discarded meaning.
And that concept of linguistic ghost, so critical. Kuang is making a really profound statement on epistemology here.
Language inherently fails to capture the entirety of human experience.
Right, and these institutions are just mining that failure. The text dives into real etymology to prove how unstable words are, like take the English word nice.
Oh, this blew my mind.
In Middle English, derived from the Latin nescius, it actually meant stupid or ignorant.
Which is wild. So you have a word that meant stupid, and over centuries it drifts to mean fussy, then refined, and eventually pleasant.
Right. Words are not static tools in a toolbox. They are living organisms that carry hidden, shifting, and entirely contradictory.
So if you are a silver worker in Babel, you can't just know the dictionary definition of a word.
Not at all. You have to understand the centuries of linguistic drift, the cultural trauma, and the historical baggage attached to it.
To truly wield the magic, you have to understand the ghosts haunting the syntax.
Exactly.
If you've ever been in a conversation and realized there is a specific word in Spanish or German or Japanese that perfectly encapsulates a feeling and English just stares blankly at you with nothing to offer, you understand exactly where Kuang hides her magic.
She weaponizes that exact linguistic inadequacy.
But she takes this concept of language-altering reality and completely flips the methodology in Katabasis.
She really does. The transition from Oxford to Cambridge in Kuang's universe is also a transition in the fundamental nature of the magic. We move from translation to what is termed analytic magic.
And analytic magic is so deeply weird.
Oh, it is bizarre.
It is framed as this highly rigorous, peer-reviewed, intensely academic discipline. But it is essentially using logic puzzles and geometry to find loopholes in the laws of physics.
Well, it strips away the cultural romance of translation and replaces it with brutal, esoteric mathematics. You have postgraduate students, like a protagonist Alice Law, wrestling with incredibly technical constructs.
They're drawing precise pentagrams.
Right, but they aren't using standard chalk. The fuel for analytic magic involved visceral, organic matter-specific, pulverized sea creatures mixed into the chalk.
Which is such a striking detail. Why seashell? Are they acting as a calcium carbonate grounding wire for the spell?
It grounds the esoteric and the physical. The ocean represents a primordial, chaotic state of matter, and these students are imposing strict linguistic and geometric order on it.
Okay.
They use this chalk to draw things like Sue's basic transportative pentagram, and then another academic will come along and publish Satilla's modifications to make it more efficient.
They're treating magic like software update.
Exactly. They are utilizing concepts like Rimaduan summation and manipulating the Casimir effect.
Wait, hold on. Let us unpack that. The Casimir effect is a real quantum physics concept, right?
Yes, it is.
It's the attractive force between two parallel uncharged conducting plates due to quantum vacuum fluctuation. How on earth does drawing a shape with crushed seashells manipulate quantum vacuum fluctuation?
This is where Kuang's magic systems become super philosophical. Kuang suggests that the fundamental laws of reality are not absolute. They are merely a consensus of physical premise.
A consensus.
Yeah. If you set up a linguistic paradox and focus it through the precise geometry of a pentagram, you can create a localized tear in that consensus.
It is like finding a zero-day exploit in the source code of the universe.
That is exactly it.
You input a contradictory linguistic command, the geometry acts as a focusing lens, and reality just glitches long enough for you to step through the code into another dimension.
You are crashing the operating system of physics for a microsecond, but, the universe has an immune system.
There are rules.
Right. There are built-in axioms you cannot violate without reality snapping back.
Right, the safety rules. You can't just draw a pentagram and become a god.
No. The most critical axiom established is that you cannot deliberately use analytic magic.
The universe won't allow it.
The underlying logic of the universe simply will not process a deliberate self-terminating paradox. It completely rejects the...
Which completely frames the inciting incident of the entire novel.
Professor Grimes.
Yes. Alice's mentor, Professor Grimes, is blown to pieces in a massive laboratory explosion while working with transportative analytic magic.
And because that axiom exists, because the universe won't let you magic yourself to death on purpose, every single academic at Cambridge knows it couldn't have been a suicide.
It had to be a catastrophic accident.
Exactly. He pushed the mathematical loophole too far, and the universe corrected the glitch by violent...
But this introduces the most terrifying question of Kuang's work.
Who controls...
Exactly. Whether we are talking about silver bars at Babel, powered by the ghosts of colonialism, or chalk pentagrams at Cambridge fueled by quantum glitches, Who actually holds the keys to these reality-bending tools?
Because these systems do not exist in a vacuum. They are fiercely hoarded.
They are locked behind the most elite, ivy-covered walls on the planet. Which brings us to the core architecture of Kuang's worlds.
The institution.
Yes, we have to look at the massive institutions that control these tools. We are moving from the micro level of words to the macro level of empire.
And Kuang intrinsically links the concept of the academic sanctuary with the machinery of imperial. Let us look back at Oxford in Babel.
Initially, it is presented as the ultimate intellectual utopia.
Oh, completely. You have towering spires, bustling libraries, and brilliant students from all corners of the globe gathering purely for the pursuit of knowledge.
But Kuang meticulously dismantles that facade. She reveals that this entire utopian sanctuary is basically a parasite.
It is built squarely on the back of global resource extraction.
The Translation Institute isn't a neutral observer of the world at all. It is the central nervous system of the British Empire.
Yes, the magic generated at Oxford is exactly what keeps British warships, what keeps their factories running, and what enforces their colonial laws.
And Kuang anchors this fantasy directly to real-world historical atrocities.
She does. The text delves heavily into the global silver trade. In both our history and the world of Babel, the silver doesn't just magically appear in Oxford.
No, it flows from the Americas, specifically the Potosi mine.
The conditions of the Potosi mines cannot be overstated. We are talking about tens of thousands of indigenous people and enslaved Africans forced into the mountain under horrific toxins.
The life expectancy in those mines was essentially a rounding. They were pulling this metal out of the earth at the cost of their life.
That is the invisible blood staining every beautiful, glowing silver bar in the Oxford Translation.
The silver is then shipped to Europe to enrich the empire and subsequently used to leverage trade with China.
The academics at Babel are taught to view themselves as sophisticated, neutral scholars, but in reality, they are the highly paid technicians of brutal extractive economy.
There is a scene that illustrates this psychological colonization perfectly.
The reception.
Right. Robin, who is a Chinese boy taken from Canton and raised in England to become a translator, is at this lavish elite reception.
And one of the wealthy British guests asks him to explain Chinese lacquer.
On the surface, it is a standard, polite party conversation. Like, tell me about the beautiful crafts of your homeland.
But when you strip away the polite veneer, the power dynamic is suffocating. Robin isn't being engaged as an intellectual equal.
No, his entire culture, his heritage, is being reduced to an exotic artifact for the entertainment of the colonized.
He is expected to perform his identity on demand.
It is the commodification of the colonized, and Robin's complicity only deepens. He is forced to act as the linguistic bridge for the empire's darkest impulse.
The text details how Robin has to translate for a character named Mr. Biss.
Oh, this is awful.
He is a British trader aggressively pushing the opium trade in Canton.
Which locks us directly into the real-world opium war. Kuang includes Commissioner Lin, the actual historical Chinese official who seized and destroyed British opium.
And then the British used that as the primary catalyst to launch a devastating military campaign to force China's market.
And Robin is standing right there in the middle of it. He is the verbal conduit making this historical trauma possible.
No, it is a fascinating thematic approach, but it has certainly polarized readers.
Oh, for sure.
If you look at critical reception, there are readers who find this mapping of magical silver onto the actual atrocities of the global silver trade to be incredibly clever and morally resonant.
Right.
But others, and one prominent Reddit reviewer specifically phrased it this way, felt the anti-colonial themes landed like a rhetorical brick to the face.
It is a valid structural observation. We should definitely point that out impartially. Some readers felt that the dialogue occasionally slipped from natural character interaction into outright academic lecturing.
Where characters suddenly sound like they are reading from a post-colonial studies syllabus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But whether one finds the delivery heavy-handed or refreshingly uncompromising, the structural argument remains devastating.
The institution of academia does not exist to elevate humanity. It exists to serve and optimize power.
And if Babel shows us how an institution exploits the physical world, Katabasis takes it a step further.
It shows us what an institution does to the human.
Because Kuang literally constructs a metaphysical mirror to the universe, and that mirror is hell.
Right. Alice Law decides she must go into the underworld to retrieve Professor Grime.
But Kuang's vision of hell completely subverts expectation.
There are no lakes of fire. There are no demons with pitchforks punishing the wicked.
The visual is unbelievable. Alice and her classmate Peter Murdoch cross over, and they find themselves in an endless expanse of rolling sand dunes.
Under an eternal, suffocating dusk.
And when they look up, hanging in the sky above them, completely upside down and translucent, is an exact replica of Cambridge University.
It immediately establishes a terrifying psychological premise.
Hell is not an external punishment imposed by God.
No, Hell is the internalization of the living world's bureaucratic structures, its absurd hierarchies, and its relentless pressures.
Hell is Cambridge, specifically because Professor Grimes's entire moral and intellectual universe was bounded by the walls of Cambridge.
So Alice and Peter, and I have to mention, Peter essentially brings snacks on this trip to hell.
Which is the most deeply accurate portrayal of a grad student ever.
Exactly. They navigate this landscape and arrive at the Court of Pride, and of course, in an academic hell, the central torture chamber is a library.
Populated by the translucent shades of dead scholars. And what is brilliant is how they are tortured.
It isn't physical.
They are plagued by it is a slow, terrifying cognitive decay where their memories, their identities, and most importantly, their academic contributions simply fade into the sand.
They are literally in the afterlife, facing eternity, and they are obsessing over Satan.
They are terrified of their publication records being forgotten.
Kuang actually drops the real-world philosopher George Edward Moore in.
And what is one of the foundational thinkers of the analytic tradition doing in hell?
He is gossip. He is petty, he is vindictive, and he is slagging off continental philosophers over centuries-old academic turf war.
It is a razor-sharp satire of academic vanity. The text explicitly references different philosophical frameworks of pride, Augustine's views on self-love, Plato's concepts of hubris, Confucius's thoughts on arrogance.
Ultimately defining pride in this context as a fatal mismatch between a person's true nature and their inflated sense of institutional importance.
But I want to push back on this just being a dark comedy about the publish or perish mentality.
Okay.
When you look at how the leak fundamentally erodes their humanity, is Kuang suggesting something much more insidious? Like, is she saying that when you completely submit to an institution, you hollow yourself out so thoroughly that you literally cannot exist without it, even after death?
Absolutely. The institution becomes your ontological baseline. You cannot conceive of an existence devoid of its hierarchies.
Consider Professor Grimes.
Right. He didn't die trying to save the world. He died trying to procure a human colon for an undisclosed, highly unethical research project just to secure his legacy.
The institution demands your entire soul, and it provides absolutely nothing of spiritual value in return.
Which forces us to look at the breaking point.
If these institutions, whether it is the British Empire running on stolen silver, or a university that traps your soul in a library of sand, or this omnipotent, this oppressive, what happens when someone finally snaps?
What happens when individuals try to dismantle the machinery? Because Kuang's work is obsessed with the brutal, physical, and moral cost of resistance.
In Kuang's universe, resistance is never a clean, heroic arc. It is always a bloody, agonizing conflict.
Let us return to Robin in Babel. He spends years enduring a profound internal tearing.
Oxford offers him comfort, prestige, and assimilation.
But it requires him to actively participate in the subjugation of his own people.
That internal tearing finally materializes externally in the Hermes Society. This is a clandestine group of Babel students, including Robin's fiercely radical brother Griffin and his brilliant friend Victoire.
And their evolution is fascinating. They start out doing what students traditionally do. They print pamphlets.
Right. They make logical, reasoned arguments against the empire. They engage in minor, annoying acts of sabotage.
But they quickly hit a terrifying realization. You cannot dismantle a massive, violent empire with reasoned debate.
The empire relies on the absolute stability of its translation magic to project forth.
So the Hermes Society realizes they have to attack the root code of the magic itself. They organize a full-blown strike targeting the central tower of Babel.
And the mechanism of their strike is brilliant. They don't try to blow the tower up with gunpowder.
No, they exploit the exact linguistic vulnerabilities they were trained to utilize.
They subtly introduce deliberate, highly complex translation errors into the master silver bars.
They essentially upload a conceptual virus into the empire's operating.
Ships break down. Factories halt. They use the master's tools to short-circuit the master's house.
But the empire does not engage in a polite debate about their grievances.
No, the empire responds with absolute, crushing military violence.
The cost of their clever linguistic strike. Griffin, the fiery heart of the rebellion.
Other students are slaughtered. It is an absolute bloodbath. Robin and Victoire are forced into hiding.
They manage to land a crippling blow against the global superpower. But they lose their family, their friends, and their entire process.
Kuang leaves you staring at this smoking ruin of a victory, forcing you to ask if dismantling a corrupt system requires sacrificing everything that tethered you to your humanity. Did you actually win?
That exact thematic question of ultimate sacrifice is mirrored structurally in Katabasis. Alice, but it is played out on an intensely intimate metaphysical scale.
Alice and Peter are trying to navigate a shifting, hostile reality. They are literally arguing about the geometry of the underworld.
Peter tries to map it using hyperbolic space, while Alice insists it operates on a principle of chthonic flux.
It is so perfect. They are surrounded by shifting walls made of translucent human bone, and they are arguing about non-Euclidean.
But the entities they encounter strip away that academic detachment very quickly.
They meet the Weaver Girl.
Yes. She traps them in a twisted version of the prisoner's dilemma, forcing them to choose between red and green apples, manipulating their foundational greed and survival.
And then they encounter Elspeth. This is a chilling moment.
Elspeth was a former student of Grimes who was completely erased from the Cambridge institutional memory.
She was ostracized, her records destroyed, her existence denied.
And Elspeth delivers the fatal blow to their academic arrogance. The pulverized seashell chalk, the core mechanism of their reality-bending analytic magic, is completely inert in hell.
It is just dust. The fundamental laws of physics down here do not respond to their syntax.
They are completely disarmed.
And she warns them about the Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, clarifying that in its raw, unfiltered state, it doesn't just erase memories.
It annihilates existence.
Stripped of their intellectual armor, they stumble into a trap set by the crypt keys.
These are a sect of illusionists, visual artists who practice a dark, deeply subjective form of magic that directly counters the rigorous logic of the academic.
The crypt key trap Alice in an inescapable paradox of reality.
And here's where the bill comes. To save Alice, Peter Murdoch has to break the rules of reality, using his own life as the fuel.
He uses a philosophical concept called an aletheia, a true contradiction.
It is a statement that is fundamentally logically impossible, being both entirely true and entirely false simultaneously.
He forces this paradox into the architecture of the illusion, and he bonds it with his own blood.
Paradox acts as a bomb. It shatters the crypt key's illusion, freeing Alice, but the feedback loop of the aletheia kills.
He dies in the underworld. Now Alice, driven by that same relentless institutional arrogance, refuses to accept failure.
She tracks down King Yama, the sovereign architect of the Pacific underworld, and initiates a negotiation.
She treats the Lord of the Dead like a difficult dean of admissions.
She leverages everything to get Peter's soul back through a localized tear in reality.
And she actually succeeds. Peter comes back to the world of the living.
But Kuang does not allow clean resurrection. Peter comes back wrong.
He bears permanent physical, necrotic scars. His body is a living ledger of the fact that he died.
He crossed a threshold, and the universe permanently etched the receipt onto his flesh.
We've seen academic rebellion in Babel and metaphysical sacrifice in Katabasis.
But if we want to examine the absolute horrifying terminus of ambition and the psychic toll of warfare, we have to look at the Poppy War Trilogy.
Absolutely. The stakes shift completely. We leave the polished halls of Oxford and the abstract theories of Cambridge, and we're dropped into the dirt, the blood, and the visceral survivalism of Rin.
Rin begins as an orphan of a devastating previous war, living in absolute poverty and facing horrific.
Her only escape is to test into the Synagard Academy, the elite military institution of the Nican Empire.
And the sheer self-destructive grit she exhibits stagger. To keep herself awake to study, she literally stabs herself with needles.
She strikes desperate, illegal barter, trading opium to a tutor just to acquire the knowledge necessary to pass.
It is a massive psychological red flag from chapter. She views her own body and her own well-being as completely expendable.
She is forging herself into a weapon before the war even begins, and her ultimate weapon is shamanism.
But we must be very clear on how shamanism operates in Kuang's universe. This is not the elegant mathematical silverworking of Babel.
Shamanism is a raw, pantheistic connection to the chaotic forces of the universe.
Rin becomes the conduit for the phoenix, a god of pure, unadulterated fire and absolute destruction.
I want to pause on the biological mechanics of this because it is terrifying. How does a human brain physically and psychologically host a demon? Does the ego just step aside?
No, the ego is actively incinerated. The human mind is not designed to process the infinite.
So when Rin taps into the phoenix,
the god does not gently lend her power. It attempts to consume her consciousness. The power physically burns her from the inside out, and mentally it constantly pulls her toward her.
The spiritual void where the gods reside.
Exactly. It is a state of absolute chaotic madness where the individual self is to exist.
And we see the devastating endpoint of this process in her teacher, Altan. He was the previous conduit, and he is entirely broken.
He is consumed by a pathological obsession with creating an army of shamans.
The power he sought to control the war has instead driven him completely insane.
Because the war they're fighting requires that level of madness to survive.
The Nican Empire is invaded by the Hesperian Empire, and the geopolitical and technological disparity is massive.
The Hesperians possess industrialized warfare, chemical weapons, and airships. But more terrifying than their technology is their theology.
The Hesperians worship the divine architect. Unlike the chaotic pantheistic gods of Nikon, the divine architect represents rigid, absolute order.
And this theology fuels a terrifyingly pure colonial mindset. The Hesperians do not view the people of Nik's enemy.
They view them as a biological infestation. They view them as subhuman obstacles in the way of the architect's ordered universe.
Kuang pulls absolutely no punches in depicting the clash between these ideas. The massacres, the systematic use of biological warfare, the public execution.
The trauma inflicted on the Nikan people is absolute. And under this immense, crushing pressure, Rin's moral framework completely collapses.
Her final tether to humanity is her friend. He acts as her external con.
But as the war drags on and the atrocities mount, even Kite cannot anchor her against the pull of the phoenix.
Rin descends into a terrifying, apocalyptic god complex.
The text highlights a chilling shift in her internal monologue. She stops viewing herself as a soldier following orders
And starts viewing herself as a divine instrument. She states, I am the force of creation. I hold the brush.
She has fully internalized the violence of the gods.
And she uses that justification to commit an unspeakable atrocity.
To end the war, she channels the full power of the phoenix and literally burns an entire country to ash, sacrificing millions of lives, both enemy and civilian.
It is a staggering action. Look at the tragic trajectory we've tracked here.
Robin in Babel uses subtle linguistic viruses to try and disable a colonial empire. Rin uses literal divine nuclear fire to annihilate one.
But the endpoint is exactly the same. In their desperation to destroy the oppressor, they both completely metabolize the violence they despise.
They become the monsters they were fighting.
They are entirely consumed by the cost of their own resistance, which brings us to the most fascinating pivot in Kuang's bibliography.
Yellowface.
Because she takes these massive operatic, the theft of power, the erasure of marginalized people, the deeply corrupting force of ambition.
And she strips away all the fantasy, all the magic, and all the gods. She drops those exact same themes into a modern-day Manhattan apartment in the contemporary thriller Yellowface.
And the craziest part is that it doesn't lose a single ounce of its intensity.
The psychological horror of Yellowface is just as suffocating as the bone walls of hell in Katabasis. The ultimate act of violence in this book isn't a magical strike.
It is the theft of a manuscript.
Let us look at the protagonist, June Hayward. She is a profoundly unremarkable, struggling writer.
Her career is entirely stagnant, and she is consumed by a deep toxicity and rampant jealousy.
Her foil, and supposedly her friend, is Athena Liu. Athena is everything. June is not successful, critically acclaimed, brilliant, and the absolute literary darling of the publisher.
And then, during a deeply uncomfortable hangout in Athena's apartment, Athena tragically dies in a freak accident right in front of her.
And in the immediate aftermath, while the body is barely cold, June makes a calculated sociopathic decision that drives the entire narrative.
She steals Athena's newly finished, completely unpublished
A manuscript titled The Last Front. The subject matter is crucial.
It is a meticulously researched historical novel about the horrific experience of Chinese slave trafficking.
This is a profound piece of cultural history that June, a white woman, has absolutely zero connection to and no baseline understanding.
But she doesn't care. She takes the manuscript home, lightly edits it, and she submits it to her publisher as her own.
And then she and her publisher engage in this grotesque rebranding exercise. She drops her last name, publishing under the ethnically ambiguous Juniper Song.
They take an author photo with specific lighting and styling to obscure her whiteness.
They actively lean into the marketability of the trauma, wearing the aesthetic of diversity like a skin.
Kuang uses June to expose the staggering hypocrisy of the modern publishing. The industry loudly proclaims its dedication to authentic voices and diverse narratives.
But when pushed, they prioritize marketability over truth every single time. And this is perfectly illustrated by the character of Candace.
Candace is a junior editorial assistant at the publishing house, and crucially, she is Asian American.
She reads June's stolen, butchered manuscript and flags it. She points out massive cultural inaccuracies, racist tropes, and fundamental misunderstandings of the history.
And how does the institution that champions diversity respond?
They silence her. June immediately flexes her power as the newly minted, highly profitable author. She throws a tantrum, threatens to pull the book, and forces the publisher to fire Candace.
The institution demonstrates that it loves the profitable aesthetic of a diverse narrative, but it will readily and ruthlessly crush the actual diverse voice in the room to protect the white author holding.
June's commitment to the theft is terrible. She recognizes that she can't just steal the future.
She has to erase the past.
She actually visits Athena's grieving mother, and under the guise of helping her clean, June manipulates the mother into destroying Athena's old notebooks and hard drives.
She tells the mother, it is too painful to keep these, but what she is actually doing is systematically destroying the paper trail.
She is incinerating the real history to cement her stolen reality.
But Kuang doesn't let her escape the psychological toll. The narrative shifts into a paranoid thriller. June begins to experience a total mental collapse.
She is haunted by the ghost of guilt.
She thinks Athena is haunting her. She goes to a Chinese-American book club event, which she had absolutely no business attending, and she sees a woman in the crowd who looks exactly like Athena.
She starts hallucinating a physical presence in her apartment. The paranoia is literally fracturing her psyche.
And as her mind unravels, so does the illusion of her relationship with Athena. June desperately clung to this narrative that she and Athena were literary soulmates,
telling herself, Athena would have wanted me to finish this.
But then she speaks with Athena's ex-boyfriend, Jeff, and a former classmate, John Hong, and they shatter that.
They tell her the truth. Athena didn't respect June. Athena thought June was a talentless hack.
She actively mocked June's writing behind her back.
Yeah.
Athena viewed June not as a peer, but as a pathetic prop to make herself feel superior.
It completely destroys the foundational lie June built her theft upon. She wasn't honoring a friend.
She was a parasite feeding off someone who despised her. And this realization turns her paranoia into a weapon she wields against innocent people.
There is a scene that is so viscerally uncomfortable it is difficult to read. June is guest teaching a creative writing workshop, desperately trying to play the role of the esteemed author.
A young student named Skylar submits a short story. June reads it, and her guilt-addled brain completely misfires.
She, publicly, in front of the entire class, aggressively accuses Skylar of plagiarism.
She projects her own massive radioactive guilt onto this young writer, attempting to destroy the student's reputation.
And the absolute horror of the scene is that June realizes minutes later that Skylar didn't plagiarize a single word.
Skylar had simply used a generic writing prompt that June herself had handed out to the class.
June is so consumed by the fear of being exposed as a fraud that she has become an active menace to everyone around her.
Which perfectly sets up the climax of the novel, the final, devastating spin. June is in her apartment, terrified of the ghost, when the entity trolling her online and threatening to expose her is finally revealed.
It isn't the spirit of Athena Liu.
No, the ghost haunting her is Candace, the editorial assistant that June got fired to protect her life.
Candace has been playing the long game. She has meticulously gathered the evidence, and she has secretly recorded June's panicked, undeniable confession.
She stands in June's apartment and informs her that it is over. Candace is writing a massive tell-all memoir exposing the entire theft, the racism, the firing, the destruction of the notebooks.
She is going to completely annihilate June's career. Now, in any traditional moral narrative, this is where the villain breaks down, confesses, and accepts their punishment.
But this is where June Hayward proves she is the ultimate apex predator of the modern digital age. Faced with total ruin, June does not apologize.
She pivots.
She immediately conceptualizes a counteroffensive. She decides that if Candace is going to write a tell-all book, June will write her own tell-all book first.
And she will control the narrative.
And the strategy she outlines is absolutely chilling. She decides to actively weaponize the mechanics of the internet.
She plans to position herself as the ultimate victim of a massive orchestrated hoax.
She is going to craft a narrative where she, an innocent white woman just tricked to honor her deceased friend, was viciously targeted by a vindictive, jealous person of color who manipulated the woke mob to destroy her.
She understands precisely how the attention economy functions. She realizes that in the modern digital ecosystem, objective truth is entirely secondary to a polarizing, sensationalized narrative that generates outrage.
She knows there is a massive demographic online that is primed to consume and financially support a narrative of white victimization.
So I have to ask you, is June Hayward an evil, sociopathic mastermind? Or is she simply a mirror? Is she just flawlessly executing the exact cynical, morally bankrupt strategies that the publishing industry and the social media algorithms explicitly taught her to use?
It is a deeply disturbing conclusion. June learned the rules of the institution. She saw the industry rewarded theft disguised as authenticity, and she optimized that strategy to survive, regardless of who she had to crush in the process.
She is no different than the academics at Oxford hoarding silver, or Rin burning a country to ash.
The scale is different, but the institutional corruption of the soul is exactly the same.
We have covered an incredible, sprawling amount of ground today. We started at the micro level, looking at the thermodynamics of mistranslated words carved into glowing silver at the heart of the British Empire in Babel.
We descended into the metaphysical bureaucracy of hell, navigating shifting bone walls and quantum logic puzzles under an upside-down Cambridge Katabasis.
We witnessed the apocalyptic, psyche-shattering reality of human beings trying to host gods of fire on the war-torn battlefields of Nikan and the Poppy War.
And we brought all of those massive themes of theft, erasure, and ambition crashing down into a claustrophobic Manhattan apartment where a stolen manuscript becomes the ultimate weapon.
It is a phenomenal journey through Kuang's literary universe. So as you go about your week, we want you to genuinely interrogate the institutions you interact with.
Look at your workplace, your university, the platforms where you get your news.
Ask yourself, how much agency do I actually possess in these structures? Am I reading the original unvarnished truth, or am I reading a translation designed to optimize someone else's power?
You have to question the architecture of your reality because, as we've explored today, the institutions that build that reality are never new.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. We have spent an hour dissecting the immense, terrifying power of the words that are written. Whether those words are carved into colonial silver, drawn in pulverized seashells on a laboratory floor, or printed in a stolen best-selling novel.
But consider this.
If words and the narratives they construct literally dictate the boundaries of our physical and social reality, what happens to the narratives that are entirely erased, the untranslated thoughts, the destroyed notebooks, the voices of the colonized that were purposefully silenced? Who holds the ultimate terrifying power of the story that is never allowed to be told at all?